Hello, brubs. We're back with Alraune, a 1911 novel by Heinz Ewers, illustrated by Melon Blaine and translated by S. Guy Indore. This is a 1929 translation, and we are on the last chapter of the book, chapter 16. There's also a little finale at the end as well, so we shall get to that. Chapter 16, which announces how Alraune came to her end. Slowly, he walked up to his room. He washed and bandaged his wound, and he laughed to think of the girl's shooting ability. She'll soon learn how, he thought. We'll have a little target practice. Then the horrified stare in her eyes as she tore herself loose and ran away recurred to him, all undone, full of wild despair, as though she had committed a great crime, and after all it was only an unfortunate coincidence that fortunately had turned out all right. He hesitated. A coincidence, that was it exactly. She didn't consider it a mere coincidence. She took it as an act of fate. He reflected, yes, indeed, that was it, and that was why she had taken fright and run away. She had looked into his eyes and seen her own image, and it was as though she had seen Death himself, strewing blossoms wherever her feet trod. Attorney Menasse had warned him, now it's your turn, and Alraune, had she not told him the very same thing when she had begged him to go? Was not the old magic acting upon him, as upon all the others? His uncle had left him worthless paper. Now they were quarrying gold out of the rocks. Alraune enriched her victims before she killed them. Now she was suddenly stricken with fear. Now only. And he bared his wound again. Sure enough, he could feel his heart beating right under the black streak. It was only the motion of his arm as he pointed to the squirrel that had twisted his body out of line and thus saved him. No, no, he did not want to die, if only for the sake of his mother. Yes, for his mother, but even otherwise. In all these long years he had patiently, painfully learnt how to live. And now he possessed this great art which so few have acquired. He lived fully and strongly, stood on the peak of the world and enjoyed the earth and its delights. Fate must love me, he thought, for she has pointed a warning finger at me, and her signs speak louder than Manasse's words. Thank God there's still time. He drew out his trunk, threw back the lid, and began to pack his things. What were his uncle's closing words in the leather-bound volume? Try your luck. Too bad that I shan't be there any longer when your turn comes. I would have loved to see that. He shook his head. No, Uncle Jacob, he murmured. This time you won't have any fun out of me. Not this time. He gathered up his shoes and socks, set aside a shirt and a suit for himself. Then he noticed the deep blue bathrobe hanging over the back of a chair. He picked it up and considered the tear with its burnt edges which the bullet had made. I ought to leave it here, he said, as a memento for Alraune. She may care to add it to the other objects in her collection. He heard a deep sigh in back of him. He turned around. There she stood in the middle of the room, clad in a thin negligee, and she was looking at him with big, sad eyes. You're packing, she whispered, so you're going. I thought so. A lump rose in his throat. He choked it down and gathered his strength of will. Yes, Alraune, he said, I'm going away. She threw herself on a chair and looked at him without saying a word. He went to the washbowl, gathered up his toilet articles, comb, brushes, soap, and sponge. Finally, he pulled the lid and locked the trunk. So, he cried decisively, now I'm ready. He went up to her in order to shake hands. She did not move. Her arms lay in her lap, and her pale lips remained closed. Only her eyes spoke, and they pleaded, do not go, do not leave me, stay with me. Alraune, he mumbled, and in his voice there was both a reproach and a plea. Let me go, it seemed to say. But her eyes would not loosen their hold. Do not abandon me, they said. He could feel his willpower melting away like snow in a spring thaw. With a great effort he turned his eyes away. But she spoke up at once. "Do not go," she insisted. "Stay with me." "No," he cried, "I don't want to. You're going to destroy me as you destroyed the others." He turned his back to her. On the table was some cotton moistened with oil that he had used to salve his wound. He tore off two pieces and stopped his ears. "Now speak," he cried. "If you like, I cannot hear you. And I can't see you. I have to go. I tell you, and you know it. Let me go." Softly she whispered, "Then you shall free me." She stepped up to him and lightly touched his arm with her hand, and the trembling of her fingers spoke to his flesh. "Stay with me. Do not abandon me." The sweet touch of her hand was like a delicate kiss. "Just a second," he said to himself. "Just a second, and then I shall go." And he closed his eyes and, breathing deeply, savored the caress of her fingers. Her hands rose, and his trembling cheeks felt her soft touch. Slowly she wound her arms around his neck, bent his head back, stood on her toes, and put her moist lips to his mouth. "How strange," he mused. "Her nerves speak to my nerves, and I understand every word they say." She drew him aside just one step and then pushed him so that he sat on the bed. And she sat on his knees and wrapped him in a mantle of delicate caresses. With her slender fingers, she pulled the cotton from his ears, and in a low, husky voice breathed sultry words of love. He did not understand her, for her voice was below a whisper, but he could feel the meaning in her breath. She no longer said, "Stay." Now she was saying, "How good it is that you are staying." He still kept his eyes closed tightly. The meaningless whisper of her lips still sounded in his ears, and the sharp points of her fingers ran like thin flames across his chest and over his face. She did not pull him, she did not urge him, and yet he could feel the power of her nerves streaming into his body and drawing him down on the bed. Slowly, slowly he let himself sink. Then suddenly she jumped up. He opened his eyes and saw her run to the door and shut it, and then draw the heavy curtains over the window. The room lay bathed in dull twilight. He wanted to rise, but she was back before he could move a single limb. She threw off her black negligee and came back to him. She shut his eyes with her gentle fingers, and he felt her lips press against his own. He felt her little breast in his hand, and on his legs he felt the nails of her toes lightly scratch his flesh. He felt her curls falling over his cheeks. He did not defend himself. He gave himself to her wishes. "Are you staying?" she asked, but he realized that she only asked because she wanted to hear an answer from his lips, too. "Yes," he said softly. Like raindrops in May, her kisses fell upon him. Her caresses dripped upon him like a shower of almond blossoms borne on an evening wind, and her words of love glittered all about him like the pearly cascades in the marble basin. "It was you who taught me," she breathed. "You showed me what love could be. Now you must stay for the sake of that love, which you yourself created." Lightly she stroked his wound and kissed it. "I hurt you," she whispered. "I struck you close to the heart. Do you wish to beat me? Shall I fetch the horsewhip? Do whatever you wish with me. Tear my skin to bits with your teeth. Take a knife, anything. Drink my blood. Do with me whatever you care to. I am yours. Yours. Your slave. Your lowest slave." He closed his eyes again and sighed deeply. "You are my mistress," he thought. "You have triumphed." Sometimes when he entered the library, it seemed to him as though he heard a burst of low laughter from the corner. The first time he heard it, he thought it must be Alraune, although it was not her voice. He looked everywhere, but he could not find anyone. When he heard it again, he was frightened. "It is Uncle Jacob's hoarse voice," he thought. "He's laughing at me." Then he collected and composed himself. "It's nothing but hallucination," he murmured. "And no wonder. My nerves are completely on edge." He went about as if in a dream. He slunk around, swaying with drooping limbs and head and staring, listless eyes. When he was with her, his blood pounded, his nerves tautened, and functioned. When he was out of her sight, his body fell to pieces. His blood crept through his vessels, sickly slow. True, he was her teacher. He opened her eyes and taught her the mysteries of the East, all the games of ancient races who have made of love and art. But it seemed to him as though he revealed nothing new to her, but only recalled to her that which had been hers for ages. Often before he spoke, his passion flared up like a forest fire in a summer draught. It was he who cast the spark, and yet he dreaded this burst of flames that scorched his flesh and fevered him and dried his blood, and yet made it run madly through his veins. Once, as he slunk across the court, he met Freitsheim. "You no longer care to ride, young master?" the old coachman asked. Quietly he replied, "No, not any more." Then he noticed the old man's eye, and he saw him about to open his dry lips. "Don't talk, old man," he exclaimed quickly. "I know what you want to say, but I can't." The coachman gazed after him as Frank walked away towards the garden. He spat out and shook his head reflectively. Then he made the sign of the cross. This is Alraune by Heinz Ewers. One evening, Frida Gontram sat on the stone bench beneath the copper beeches. He walked up to her and offered her his hand. "Back already, Frida?" "The 2 months are up," she said. He wiped his forehead. "2 months?" he echoed. "It seems like a week." "How is your brother?" he continued. "He is dead," she replied. "Long ago. We buried him up there in Davos, Vicar Schroeder and I." "Dead!" he cried out. Then, as though he wished to brush the thought away, he changed the topic quickly. "What's new out in the world? We live here like hermits. We never get beyond the garden." "The Duchess died of a stroke," she began. "Countess Olga." But he did not let her continue. "Stop, stop," he cried. "I don't wish to hear any more. Death, death, and death." "Not another word, Frida, not another word." Somehow he was glad that she was back. They spoke very little to each other, but they sat together quietly, secretly, when Alraune was in the house. She was angry that Frida had returned. "Why did she come? I certainly don't want her. I want no one but you." "Let her be," he said. "She's in no one's way. She hides herself wherever possible." Alraune said, "She's always with you as soon as I'm not around." "I know, but let her beware." "What do you intend to do?" he asked. She answered, "Do? Nothing. Have you forgotten that I need not do anything? Everything just happens of itself." His opposition was suddenly roused to life again. "You are dangerous," he said, "like a poisonous berry." She lifted her chin. "Then why does she come around and let herself be tempted? I ordered her to go away forever. You changed my command to 2 months. It's your fault." "No," he cried, it is not my fault. She wanted to drown herself then." "All the better," Alraune laughed. He stopped short and then said rapidly, "The Duchess is dead. She had a stroke." "Thank God," Alraune laughed. He bit his teeth together, seized her arm, and shook her. "You're a witch," he hissed. "Someone ought to kill you." She did not defend herself, though his fingers dug into her flesh. "Who?" she jeered. "You?" "Yes, I," he screamed. "If I planted the seed of this poisonous tree, and I'll put the axe to it and free the world of you." "Do it," she piped sweetly. "Do it, Frank Braun, do it." Her scorn was like oil on the fire of his anger. The heat of his passion bleared his eyes. His face was distorted. He flung her away and raised his fist. "Strike," she cried, "strike. Oh, I love you when you're wild." His arm dropped. He will drowned in the flood of her caresses. He awoke that night. A soft, vacillating light was shed upon him from the large silver candlestick on the mantel. He was lying in his great-grandmother's mighty bed, and right above him hovered the wooden mannequin. "When it falls, it will dash my brains out," he thought, still half asleep. "I must remove it." Then he looked below, and there at the foot of the bed he saw Alraune huddled on the floor. She was murmuring softly to herself, and her hands were shaking something that rattled. He peered at her. She was holding the dice box made from her mother's skull and casting the dice. Her father's bones. 9, she muttered, and 7, 16. She put the bone dice back into the box, shook the rattle back and forth lightly. 11, she cried. "What are you doing there?" he interrupted her. She turned around. "I'm playing. I couldn't fall asleep, so I began to play." "What is it you're playing?" he asked. She glided over to him quickly, like a slippery little snake. "I played to find out what is to become of you and of Frida Gontram." "Well, and what did you discover?" he questioned further. She drummed on his chest with her fingers. She will die, she twittered. Frida Gontram will die. When? He urged. I don't know, she said. Soon. Very soon. He clenched his fingers. Well, and what about me? She spoke. I don't know. You interrupted me. Shall I play on? No, he yelled. No, I don't care to know. He sat there brooding darkly. Suddenly he sat up with fright and stared at the door. Soft steps were shuffling past. He distinctly heard a board creak. He jumped out of bed, took a few steps towards the door, and listened. Now the steps were gliding up the staircase. Suddenly he heard her shrill laughter behind him. Let her be, she tinkled. What do you want of her? Whom should I let be? He asked. Who is it? She still laughed. Who? Frida Gontram. Your fear is a bit early, my knight. She's still alive. He came back and sat down on the edge of the bed. Bring me wine, he cried. I must drink. She jumped up, ran into the adjoining room, brought him the crystal carafe, and poured the burgundy into the cut glasses. She's always running around that way, she explained, day and night. She says that she can't sleep, and so she walks around in the house. He did not listen to her. He gulped down the wine and stretched out his glass. More, more, he demanded. Give me more. No, she said, not that way. Lie down. I'll give you to drink if you're thirsty. She pushed his head down into the cushions and kneeled before him on the floor. Then she took a sip of wine and gave it to him from her mouth, and he grew drunk on the wine and drunker still on her lips. It was midday. The sun glowed. They sat on the marble parapet of the pond and dangled their feet in the water. Go up to my room, she said. On my dresser on the left-hand side you'll find a fish hook. Bring it to me. No, he replied, you're not going to fish. What harm have the fishes done to you? She spoke. Do as I say. Whereupon he rose and went over to the master house. He reached her room and found the hook and examined it critically. Then he laughed with satisfaction. Well, she'll not catch much with this affair. Not catch much, he continued. She'd catch the goldfish even if she used the clothes hook. He happened to glance at the bed, and his eye caught the root mannikin that she had hung in the Cupid's place. With sudden resolve, he threw the hook away and seized the stool. He put it on the bed, climbed up, and with a single jerk tore the Alraune down. He gathered together some pieces of paper, threw them into the fireplace, lit them, and put the mannikin on the flames. Then he sat down and with growing disgust watched the flickering flames consume the paper, while little Alraune was not even scorched, only blackened a little, and it seemed to him as though it were laughing at him, its little wizened face wrinkled up still more. Surely it was the very image of Uncle Jacob's slimy grin. And now, again, from all the corners of the room resounded that same sticky laughter. He arose, took his knife from the table, opened its sharpest blade, and taking the mannikin from the fire, attempted to cut it up into smaller and more readily inflammable pieces. The root wood was hard and tough. With all his strength he could do no more than cut off a tiny shaving, but he would not give up. Again and again he attacked it, and shaving after shaving loosened and fell to the floor. Bright beads of perspiration grew on his forehead and trickled down his face. His arms ached, his fingers blistered. He took a little rest, then gathered more paper. He brought whole armfuls of unread newspapers and magazines, crumpled up the sheets, threw the splinters on, and poured several bottles of oil of roses and cologne water over all. Ah, now it burnt, flared up angrily. Faster and faster he worked. The shavings flew beneath his knife. The mannikin became thinner and thinner, and finally it was possible to sever the arms and the legs. Still the mannikin defended itself. It stuck a sharp splinter deep into his finger, but he only grinned, smeared its ugly head with his blood, and cut long shavings down its body. He heard her voice. It sounded hoarse, almost broken. What are you doing? She cried. He threw the last piece into the blaze and turned to face her with a wild, insane gleam in his greenish eyes. I killed it, he yelled. Me, she moaned. She tore at her breast with her hands. It hurts, she whispered. It hurts. He walked past her and slammed the door shut with a bang. But an hour later he lay again in her arms, greedily drinking her poisonous kisses. It is true that he was her teacher. Guided by him, they strolled through the park of love, far from the broad and crowded avenues. There where the path came to an end in the tangled thickets, near the edge of the precipice, he stopped and turned about, but she strode on boldly. She showed neither fear nor shame, carefree, tripping lightly as in a dance step. She went on, and there was not a single poisonous fruit that grew in that wild and forbidden portion of the park of love that her fingers did not pluck it, and her smiling lips taste thereof. It was he who had first taught her how pleasant was the drunkenness induced by sipping little drops of blood of one's beloved. Her thirst, however, was unquenchable, her desire insatiable. That night he lay exhausted from her kisses. Slowly his limbs relaxed. He closed his eyes and stretched out stiff and immovable, like a dead man, but he could not sleep. His senses remained keen and awake, despite his fatigue. Through the slow, interminable hours he lay there staring out of the open window through which the flat light of the full moon came and flooded the bed. And he heard her stirring at his side, moaning softly and whispering senseless words, as she usually did on such full moon nights. Then he heard her rise and go singing to the window and return quietly. He could feel how she bent over him and stared at him. He did not move. She stood up again, went over to the table, and returned at once. Again he felt her rapid breathing on his chest. She was leaning over him, listening, waiting. Then he felt something cold and sharp crossing his skin, leaving a warm bite in its wake. He realized that she was cutting him with a knife. Now she'll stab me, he thought, but the idea did not strike him with fear. He almost yearned for it. It would not be painful, but rather sweet. Very sweet and kind. He did not move. Quietly he waited for the rapid thrust that would open his heart. She cut again, slowly and lightly, not deep, only deep enough to bring the hot blood welling up to the surface. He heard her quick breathing, and he opened his eyes slightly and peered out. Her lips were half open, her small pointed tongue pushed itself greedily between her teeth. Her little white breasts rose and fell rapidly. An insane gleam seemed to spurt out of her staring greenish eyes. Suddenly she threw herself upon him. She pressed her lips to the open wound and drank. He lay quiet, immovable, feeling his blood leaving his heart. It seemed to him as though she were drinking him dry, as though she were not going to leave him a single drop of blood. And still she drank through eons and eons. Finally she raised her head. In the moonlight he saw how her face glowed. Her cheeks were red as fire. Her brow was wet with perspiration. Her fingers caressed the dry wound, the exhausted spring from which she had sucked his red blood. Swiftly she bent down and kissed it lightly. Then she turned and stared at the moon with set eyes. Something drew her. With heavy steps she crossed over to the window. She mounted a stool, placed one foot on the sill, and stood thus, with the moon's silvery light flooding over her. Then, as though she had come to a sudden resolve, she dismounted, and looking neither to the right nor to the left, glided straight across the room. "I'm coming," she whispered. "I'm coming." She opened the door and went out. He lay for yet a while and listened to her footsteps wandering through the far rooms until their sound was lost. He was glad that she was gone. Now he could snatch some sleep. Quick, quick, before she returned. He went across the hall, bent upon reaching his room. Suddenly he heard approaching steps and had scarcely time to push himself into the shadow of a recessed door. But the black-clad figure that passed was Frida Gontram in her morning weeds, carrying a burning candle aloft, despite the brilliant full moon. It was thus attired that she took her nightly walks. He saw her pale, distorted features, the hard lines that crossed the nose, and the thin, tight lips. He saw her shy, averted eyes. She's possessed, he thought, possessed like myself. For a moment, he entertained the wish to speak to her. Could he not, perhaps? Then he shook his head. No, no. How could I help her? She barred the way to his room, so he decided to go over to the library and lie down on the divan. Softly he crept downstairs, reached the front door, drew back the bolt, and loosened the chain. Then he slipped out and crossed the court. The iron gate was wide open, as though it were daytime. That surprised him. He walked out on the street and looked around. The niche of Saint Nepomuk lay in the shadow, but the white stone image shone more brilliantly than usual. At the feet lay heaps of flowers and 4 or 5 little lamps burning brightly. It seemed as though the pious people wished to pit their eternal lamps against the moon's pagan splendor. Poor little lamps, he murmured, but in the shadow of the wall near the saint, whom the moon's light could not reach, who burnt his own holy lights, he felt secure, protected. He looked up at the saint's hard features, and it seemed to him as though they came to life in the vacillating light of the lamps. It seemed to him as though the saint were drawing himself up with pride, and looked out with challenge in his eyes upon the moonlit night. Whereupon Frank Braun hummed a little song as he had done many years ago, and though his song was low, it was ardent with deeply felt passion. John of Nepomuk, Lord of floods, protect my heart. Protect it against the fury of love. Bring me the peace and quiet of contentment. John of Nepomuk, protect me against love. Then he returned through the gate and crossed the court. And there he is. He saw her stretch her arms up towards the pale stars. Looks like she's on the roof. She might jump, bruv. The old coachman was sitting on the stone bench in front of the stables. Frank saw him raise his arm and beckon. He hastened over to him. What's up, Froschheim? Freuchheim? What's up, Freuchheim? He whispered. The old man did not answer. He only lifted his hand and pointed upward with the stem of his short pipe. What? He asked. Where? Then he saw it plainly. High up on the steep roof of the master house stood a slender, naked figure. Striding along confidently, it was Alraune. Her eyes were wide open, and she was staring up overhead to where the full moon floated in the sky. He saw her lips moving, saw her stretch her arms up toward the pale stars, as though she longed for them. And still she strode along, across the ridge, and then down along the eaves, step after step. Now she must fall. One more step, and a sudden fright seized him. His lips opened to warn her. But he stifled the cry. To warn her, to shout out her name was equivalent to killing her. She slept, and as long as she slept and wandered in her sleep, she was safe. But if he called to her and she awoke, then nothing could save her. Something in him egged him on. Shout out her name, just a single word, Alraune, and you are saved. Her life is on the tip of your tongue. Her life and your own. Shout and save yourself. He bit his teeth together and closed his eyes. He clasped his hands tightly, but he could feel. Now it must happen. He had to. He had to. There was no returning now. All his thoughts melted and ran together and forged themselves into a single long, sharp, and murderous dagger. Alraune! At that moment a wild, despairing shout resounded shrilly through the night. Alraune! Alraune! He opened his eyes and stared up at the roof. He saw Alraune drop her outstretched arms. A shudder seemed to pass through her. She turned around, and an expression of utter terror appeared on her face as a huge black shape crept out of a dormer window. Frank saw Frida Gontram spread her arms and stumble forward, and again he heard her frightened cry, Alraune. Then he saw no more. A whirling fog surrounded him. He heard, however, one dull thud, and a second one right upon that, and he heard a light, clear cry, just a single cry. The old coachman supported him. He swayed and almost fell. Then he jumped up and raced madly across the court to the house. He knelt at her side and cradled her sweet body in his arms. Her short locks were stained with much blood. He laid his ear to her heart and heard a faint light beating. She's alive, he whispered. Oh, she's still alive. And he kissed her pale brow. And at his side he saw the old coachman examining Frida Gontram. He saw him shake his head and rise ponderously. Her neck is broken, he heard him say. What did it matter to him? Alraune was alive. She was alive. Come, Freudscheim, he cried. We must carry her inside. He lifted her shoulders a bit, whereupon she opened her eyes. She did not recognize him. I'm coming, she whispered. I'm coming. Then her head dropped. He jumped up. A hoarse cry, full of mad despair, broke from his lips, echoed from the surrounding houses, and spread its dissonant notes through the garden. Alraune! Alraune! It was I. The old coachman laid a swollen hand on Frank's shoulder and shook his head. No, young master, he said. It was Miss Gontram who called out to her. He laughed shrilly. But was it not my wish? The old man's face glowered darkly. His voice sounded harshly. I wished it. The servants poured out of the houses. They brought light and noise. They screamed and talked and milled around in the broad court. Like a drunken man, he stumbled and swayed towards the house, supporting himself on the coachman's arm. I must go home, he whispered. Mother is waiting for me. Finale. It is late summer, and the hollyhocks, tightly clustered around the tall stems, are spreading their showy petals, while the mallows drop their soft-colored blossoms, pale yellow, lilac, and delicate pink. When you knocked at my door, dearest, early spring was singing in the fields. When you crossed my narrow threshold, white jonquils and yellow primroses were crying a welcome to the returning swallows. Your eyes were blue and innocent, and your days were like the heavy clusters of blue glycinias that shed their blossoms one by one onto the soft carpet. And through the long, sunny arbors of your mild existence I trod lightly, but the shadows fell, and in the dark of night eternal sin rose out of the sea, having ripened in the glowing deserts of sand in the south. Her pestilential breath preceded her, and she strewed my garden with the veils that covered her sensual beauty. Then, my wild sister, your hot soul was aroused, and filled with poison, it gloried in utter shamelessness. You drank my blood and screamed and exulted amid the torture of kisses and the pangs of desire. The sweet wonder of your rosy nails, so sharply trimmed by your maid Fanny, lengthened into wild claws, and the gleaming milk opals of your white teeth thickened into mighty fangs, while your sweet snow-white breasts, so like two newborn kittens, stiffened into the terrible paps of a whore. Your golden locks curled into venomous snakes, and in your soft jewel-like eyes that oft reminded me of the luminous sapphires of my golden Buddha, lightning crackled, and in the heat of your ardor the chains that restrain madness were melted away. But out of the lake of my soul grew temple lotus. They pushed their broad leaves out over the surface, and thus covered the whirling, seething horror of the deep. At noon the silver tears that the clouds wept on their green leaves sparkled like polished moonstones. It was there where the pale snow of the acacias lay, where now the laburnum drops its poisonous yellow, that I discovered the great beauty of chaste sin. And, sisterkin, it is thus that I learnt to understand the passions of saints. I would sit before the mirror, dearest friend, and in its reflection drink of the superabundance of your sins. On long summer afternoons, when, clad in a silken shift, you lay asleep on the white linen. You were another personage altogether, my blonde friend, a sweet companion of my dreamy hours when the sun poured laughter over my garden's gorgeous display. And still another, blonde friend of mine, when the sun sank into the sea and the gray horror of night crept out of dark bushes. Then you were my wild, sinful sister of passionate nights. But I could see in full daylight all the sins of nighttime in your naked, sleeping beauty. Realization came to me from out of the old gold-framed mirror, which has seen many a play of love in the broad turret room of the castle of San Costanzo. It was when I look up from the pages of the leather-bound volume that this truth would flash out of the mirror. Sweeter by far is the chaste sin of innocence. That there are creatures in existence, neither man nor beast, but strange, unearthly creations born of the nefarious passions of distorted minds, you will not deny, my dearest. You certainly not. All law, all exact standards are good, for is not God good, and did he not create these norms? And so likewise is he good who obeys them faithfully. Of Satan's brood is that one who, with arrogant fingers, tears the eternal laws out of their appointed brazen grooves. The Prince of Darkness, who is a mighty Lord, helps him, and with such assistance well may he create after his own pride and willfulness against all nature. Up into the heavens his work may tower, and yet it must collapse, and in its crash bury the arrogant wight who conceived it. It is for you, sisterkin, that I now write this book. Old scars were torn in the process, and the old dark blood mingled with the brighter flow of my latest love madness. Out of such soil, fertilized by blood, grow strangely beautiful blossoms. It is all true, sweet love of mine. Every word that I have told you is true. But I looked into the mirror, and from it came the final understanding of its hidden meaning and the recollection of its strangest events. Here, sisterkin, take this, my book. Take it from the hands of a mad adventurer who was a proud and wilful fool, and a quiet dreamer too. Take it, sister, from one who ran alongside of life. Miramar, Lucena, Brioni, April to October 1911. And that's it. That's the end of Alraune. All right, brubs. Now I can finally watch the movie. And then next time we shall return with Vampire. All right, that's all, brubs.